Hi, I'm Louise, the host of Auti Talk. I didn't realise we'd have a controversy right away when I started Auti Talk, but we have had one. And it's all about a YouTube video that came out which depicted a montage with pictures and music which talked about this young man who's Barron Trump. Now, Barron Trump is the youngest son of Donald Trump. He is 10 years old, and we've not seen a lot of him actually because he's been kept to one side, understandably, because he's 10 years old away from the very long presidential campaign, which seems to have been going on for quite a long time now. But we did see a few appearances from Barron, most notably when he appeared by his father's side, when his father found out that he was going to be the next president of the United States. And I felt really sorry for Barron because he was stood right near his dad. He looked very confused. I mean, what sort of preparation do you get to be the first son? He's going to be the first son for 60 years. Seeing his father being late at night must have been very difficult for him. So I remember feeling sorry for him at the time. But the video depicts Barron Trump and some of his behaviours on stage and when he was off stage watching his dad. And the person who's made the video, by the way, the video has been seen 4 million times, they hypothesise that Barron may be autistic. Now, just to be clear, no one has said that Barron Trump is autistic. His family have denied that he is, and the video goes on to talk about that. And the video claims to be supporting Barron because people have online been quite critical of the way he was with his dad, saying that he looked tired or that he looked bewildered and generally being mean. So the video looks as if it is addressing bullying by saying, listen, this might not be all that it seems. Barron might have a reason why he's acting in the way that he is. It's been made slightly worse by Rosie O'Donnell, and not slightly worse, but more public, because it turns out that Rosie O'Donnell has a child who has high functioning autism. She saw the video and she retweeted the video and talked about it. And this caused a bit of controversy with Donald Trump, the president-elect, because there's been quite a long-standing beef between Rosie O'Donnell and Donald Trump. It has been going on for quite a while and they've been quite personal with one another. Donald Trump even brought up Rosie O'Donnell during the presidential debate, so that's how big this argument has been. So I can see quite a lot of different sides here. I can understand what it must be like from all of the different point of views. The person who made the video appears to be trying to highlight something about Barron's behaviour and make it seem more normal, perhaps. Rosie O'Donnell's worried about her own child and wants to have a big public figure that can say, yes, I'm autistic and it's okay to have autism. And I can understand it from the family's point of view, from Donald Trump's point of view, from Melania Trump's point of view, to feel that their son has been criticised in this way and certain feelings have been expressed about him and aspersions have been cast about him. But what I want to do is I want to talk about a couple of points that have come out about autism from this controversy. There are many different sides to this controversy, and I'm not saying anyone is right or wrong. Obviously, I feel for Barron Trump. He's 10 years old, and even some of the most able to diagnose, the clinicians who diagnose people with ASD, they don't diagnose people right away. They spend a long time observing the child, getting different professionals' opinions. Anyone who's got a diagnosis for ASD knows it takes a long time, even if it's quite obvious that a child or an adult might have ASD. It takes a long time to get diagnosed, and people who are even medically trained to do it do not just suddenly say someone does or does not have ASD. So that's the most important thing to say. Now, if we look at Rosie's tweet, we can see what she said about it. And my slight issue with this tweet is the bit about the epidemic, which it seems to be in America. A lot of people talk about autism like an epidemic. Again, I'm not criticising Rosie O'Donnell because I can understand where she's coming from. Donald Trump himself has said something similar. I can understand why she's saying it's an epidemic because the amount of children being diagnosed with autism has definitely gone up. But I'm living proof that there are many people who had autism their whole lives and didn't know it. So it's unclear of how much it is going up because I'm older. I'm not part of this new diagnosis. I've only been diagnosed recently, and only then because I really pushed for it to happen. I think I could have lived my whole life without knowing, but I wanted to get it clear. So we've gone from 1 in 10,000 children being diagnosed over the past 20 years to 1 in 55 is Rosie's using that figure. There are different figures. 1 in 68, 1 in 100 I've heard. I think it's probably less than that, but that's my opinion. So let's have a look at how Rosie O'Donnell responded to criticism, which was quite strong from the public. She wrote a poem, which she put on her website, and she says that she did it out of love. She did it because she wanted to have some support, that she'd learnt about autism and saw the traits everywhere. And I can completely relate to that. You do see them everywhere. As soon as you realise that you have traits, your children have traits, and do any sort of research, you see it absolutely everywhere. A paediatrician once said to me that they have people coming around their house, and they mess with the magnets on the fridge and put them in order, put them in a line. And she is thinking, oh, what does that mean? But doesn't say anything, because these are just adults who have no idea that they may be on the autistic spectrum. My issue around the word epidemic is that I don't think it's a very nice way to describe it. We don't talk about epidemics about anything else, apart from real epidemics like flu or the Zika virus, viruses that are epidemics. But we have no business talking about conditions like autism as if it's an epidemic. Yes, it has gone up. Part of the reason is because those who have achieved well in life, who seemed reasonably all right, were not diagnosed. Those who were very disabled were also not diagnosed, and now the criteria for diagnosing people is a lot clearer and a lot easier. But still people don't get diagnosed. It's a very difficult thing to diagnose. But if you think about other conditions, let's say it is, as Rosie says, 1 in 55. I think it's probably more than that in the end. Well, let's think about cancer. That's 1 in 3. Is that an epidemic? Sounds like an epidemic to me. Mental health conditions, 1 in 4 people. Is that an epidemic? And we don't refer to these conditions as epidemics. Perhaps we should, because they're extremely prolific. But we don't. There's something very derogatory about an epidemic. And again, this is not a criticism for Donald Trump or for Rosie O'Donnell, because suddenly having all these children with autism, I can see why people think, oh my goodness, we have to sound the alarm bells, we have to do something about it. I totally understand. But using the word epidemic, I think, it's not really helpful. Certainly to people who have autism, you've got an epidemic. Now, when I first found out that I had autism, I wanted to change it. I just didn't want to have it because I knew the problems that I'd had in my life because of it. But then I started to realise that it is me. A lot of my personality is down to having ASD and working around it. It is what we are. When you're autistic, whatever level of functioning, or whatever level you are, this is the way you are, and it's not helpful to use the word epidemic. By all means, raise the profile, but don't call it that. As I've said before, it's not an absolute great idea to diagnose 10-year-olds off a video. For example, I mean, if you videoed anybody at all, you would see stimming behaviour, flapping behaviour. We all self-soothe ourselves. We all sometimes rock and sometimes wave our hands about. And if you were to slow-mo that, it would look as if you had ASD as well. It's also not helpful to the public because we're teaching the public specific symptoms mean ASD. And not necessarily. Some people are not comfortable with eye contact. That does not mean they have ASD. And more importantly, it doesn't mean just because you give good eye contact that you don't have it. People start to sort of hook onto these stereotypes about autism. If you start to pare it down to, ooh, look how Barron's moving, he must have ASD. Well, he might have. His family says he doesn't. But, you can't just pick a video and say, oh, he's got it. But the final issue that I have with it is really about the response from the public. This is what it's like on social media. Someone says something, and again, the person might have been raising a really good point, or it's free speech at the end of the day. If you want to say something, fair enough. It was a bit intense over one person, admittedly, but they raised an issue, so did Rosie O'Donnell, and the whole of the Twitter sphere went completely mad. I understand why they wanted to protect Barron Trump. He's only 10. I get that. But at the same time, the way they were saying, how dare you say this child has autism? How dare you say that? Who says you should say that? And they were talking as if having autism or ASD was the worst thing in the world. And that's where the prejudice around autism was coming out. You can't say that child has autism. That's just the worst thing to have in the world. So I felt the really strong reaction from the public to say, well, you can't say it's that. So as my final thoughts, I would like to just reflect on what it's like to be honest, to say, I have Asperger's or I have ASD. It is a very difficult thing to say, and I am just in the process of talking about it. There are many people who may have ASD and have chosen not to have a diagnosis. There are many people who have ASD and a diagnosis but don't tell people. That is perfectly fine. You're under no obligation to tell people. When I was diagnosed, the person who diagnosed me said, you don't have to tell anybody. You could just leave it at that. He said, I hope you will, because I hope that you will raise awareness of it and how it shows in different ways. So that's why I've chosen to be honest. But it's not up to Barron Trump and his family to be the entire publicity for ASD. It has to be someone who wants that. And when I've taken my little boy to the playground, sometimes he's behaved in a way that maybe more neurotypical children have not expected. And I've wanted to go, he's on the autistic spectrum. How awful would that be to have your mum screaming out that you're on the autistic spectrum? And how awful is it as a parent to have people casting aspersions about your child and saying, that's a bit autistic what he's doing. Have you had him looked into? No. I don't recommend doing any of that to anyone. It's shaming. Parents might not know that their child has autistic tendencies. You might be wrong, because they might not have autistic tendencies at all. So I think the main points that I would like to leave you with is, let's not generalise about this. Just because a child has a symptom doesn't mean they have ASD. Just because they don't have one doesn't mean that they don't have it. And certainly we shouldn't be going around diagnosing Barron Trump, whether he's got it or not. His family say he doesn't. And maybe it doesn't matter. Many people don't get diagnosed. They live a perfectly fine life. My opinion on diagnosis is to go for it, because you can get extra services and you know yourself better. The future for Barron Trump, he's got lots of money and lots of support. So if he does or if he doesn't really matter, because I think he's going to get all the support he needs. And I'm sure when he becomes an adult, he'll be able to talk to us about it and what his experience is like. It is good to have this debate, I think, but at the same time, be careful about how you're vilifying people in general, but people who may be on the autistic spectrum. It is just one aspect of our personality. Thank you for joining me today.